Is fat a feminist issue? That's my subject on today's Fiamengo File. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. A few weeks back, Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, came in for some criticism when it decided to remove the weigh scale from its student gym, citing concerns that some students with body issues might be triggered by the scale. And you can bet Carleton's wasn't the first university gym to make such a move. In 2015, gym staff at the California State University removed its weigh scales for one day in honor of National Eating Disorder Awareness Week. And I think we can trust the manager of Carleton University's wellness program, Bruce Marshall, to know what he's talking about when he claimed in an interview with CBC News that the removal of the scale was, quote, in keeping with current fitness and social trends, the movement away from focusing on body weight. Reaction to the students was interesting. Some students thought it was a good idea, but some bodybuilders and athletes who need the scale to monitor their weight were quite annoyed, seeing it as yet another example of politically correct sensitivities run amok. A student named Aaron Benz denounced the move as, quote, the next escalation of trigger culture. Hashtag bring back the scale trended on Twitter, with one Carleton student lamenting, next it will be the mirrors. The last I heard, Carleton had weighed the pros and cons, no pun intended, and had decided to return the scale to its place in the gym. But I suspect this is not the last we've heard of such matters. Because what started as a fringe subject in women's studies with the publication of Susie Orbach's Fat is a Feminist Issue in 1978 is now a full-blown scholarly field that's increasingly at odds with reality. Fat studies informs us that bias against fat people, particularly against fat women, is a human rights issue of equal importance to racism, expressed in countless microaggressions, such as the encouragement to care about one's weight. If you're interested in a lengthily sourced scholarly discussion of current thinking about weight, you might want to check out a chapter entitled Scientific Weightism: A View of Mainstream Weight Stigma Research Through a Feminist Lens. It's co-written by Rachel Calogero, Tracy Tilka, and Janelle Mensinger, and it's from a book called Feminist Perspectives on Building a Better Psychological Science of Gender, published in 2016. The chapter will give you an illuminating glimpse into new frontiers of so-called feminist social science, operating at the intersection of obesity research and social justice ideology. The three authors of the chapter are all tenured or tenure-stream professors at North American universities. Rachel Calogero is a professor of psychology at the University of Western Ontario with expertise in the social psychology of gender, class, inequality, and body image. Tracy Tilka is a professor of psychology at Ohio State University with expertise in body image and eating behavior. And Janelle Mensinger is a professor in the College of Nursing and Health Professions at Drexel University in Philadelphia with expertise in weight stigma. The main argument of the chapter is, not that surprisingly, a social constructionist account of obesity. The authors argue that the stigma associated with obesity is entirely social. In other words, there's nothing wrong with fat people. There's something wrong with people who think there's something wrong with fat people. And although the authors do use the phrase fat people, I suspect they prefer their phrase people at the higher end of the weight spectrum. They refer frequently to, quote, thin privilege and to, quote, weightist assumptions. A weightist assumption involves false and bigoted ideas about weight, including that weight has any real-world relationship to human health. Yes, you heard that right. The authors deny that there are any negative health consequences of obesity. They insist that there are correlations between obesity and disease, but that correlation isn't causation. They also deny that obesity is a condition that is within an individual's power to control or modify. Therefore, they see discussing obesity as a problem as itself a problem because it targets fat people and therefore increases prejudice against them. The authors assert that what we should focus on when it comes to obesity is not obese people, but what the authors call the discourse that stigmatizes obese people, including health discourses that encourage weight loss. In line with their feminist perspective, the authors are particularly concerned about the negative impacts of weightism on women. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't pretend to be able to pronounce on the precise relationship between obesity and disease, and I agree with the authors that obese people shouldn't be treated unkindly. But the question is it kind to tell obese people that no matter how overweight they become, they can still be happy and healthy? I doubt it. I suffered from atrociously bad acne as a teenager and adult, and so I know what it feels like to be unattractive. To have been told that my skin was really fine wouldn't have helped me at all. And if I could have cured my problem with diet and exercise, I would certainly have appreciated knowing that. The information would not in itself have been a source of stigma. The idea in this article seems to be in line with much social activism today, that if we just think the right thoughts and force everyone else to think them too, we can create a social utopia in which no one is ever unhappy. More specifically, there are two things going on in this article and in the scholarship around it that are, to say the least, very disturbing and are representative of the direction in which feminist social science is generally moving. First, there's an obvious blurring of the lines between social justice activism and scientific research that doesn't bode well for the future of fact-based empirical inquiry. The authors of this chapter seem to be so passionately wedded to their goal of celebrating body diversity and removing the stigma of obesity that it's hard to imagine them being able to support research that pursued the correlations between obesity and disease. They see such research as increasing the stigma around being fat, and therefore they see it as actually unethical in itself. Their stated position is that, quote, weight stigma is a social justice issue because people who are fat are denied their basic civil rights in every aspect of their lives, including their right to be fat and to live free of unfair treatment, end quote. Well, that's quite a claim, that one has a right to live free of unfair treatment, especially when the authors define unfair so incredibly broadly. Because for them, merely to pursue the argument that obesity is medically harmful is an example of unfair treatment. Although the authors claim to value empirical research, it seems pretty clear that they value their ideology far more. Second, these authors are social justice totalitarians because they not only want to create a cultural climate in which research that contradicts their objectives would be frowned on, they actually want to make it illegal to dissent from their position of fat positivity. And they say this pretty clearly. Quote, "It is absolutely essential that scholars campaign for formal legislation to protect against weight stigma and discrimination." Imagine that, formal legislation to protect against weight stigma. They want to make it illegal to stigmatize someone for being fat. We know where such rights legislation inevitably leads, to harsh penalties for having the wrong ideas. These radical scholarly ideas are also expressed in much more popular forms, as in a recent 2016 article called "Why is Fat a Feminist Issue?" It's found on an online blog called "This Body is Not an Apology." And here the author makes the explicit argument that fat women experience discrimination because of the patriarchy. We are told that, quote, "fat women are an embodiment of exactly what patriarchal society does not want women to be: visible, end quote. Implicit in the argument is that being fat is actually a form of resistance to patriarchy. In other words, that there is something heroic about making yourself fat enough to take up more space than patriarchy thinks you should, and that to suggest that someone could benefit from losing weight is misogynistic. Where do fat men fit into this theory? Well, the author can't summon the same degree of outrage over fat men's mistreatment. She says, quote, men are not expected to look aesthetically pleasing. It is more acceptable for men to be fat than it is for women, end quote. So there, as the title tells us, fat is a feminist issue and it belongs to women. So, the scale at the Carleton University gym, back in place now, it's definitely just the beginning. I found it interesting that the Carleton University wellness director told us in the interview that even without the scale, you could still assess your fitness goals, for example, through what he called girth measurements, measurements of torso, hips, chest, legs, arms, and so on. But that's sizist, isn't it? Won't measuring oneself be likely to trigger those with body issues just as surely as weighing on a weigh scale? Isn't it all part of a stigmatizing discourse? We know it is. So look out, Carleton, and every gym throughout North America. The feminists will be coming for your tape measurers soon and your fat measuring calipers as well.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please support us on Patreon. If even half of our subscribers gave us $1 per month, we'd be well on our way to creating more and better content. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Studio Brule.